we'll move on to Mickey next. Where are you, Mickey? Let me find you. There you are. I'll unmute you. Hold on a second. You're muted. Be unmute. There you go. You are unmuted.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Just going to load up my presentation. There we go. Okay. I see distractions all the time. At school, I see them in my own lessons, in observations of colleagues, in learning environments, and in learning materials. I'm hoping today to raise a little bit of awareness of these. I see them, do you? Just to warn you, you might, one or two of the things I'm going to suggest you might disagree with. I'm okay with that. But there is a little potential bit of controversy here, certainly when I start talking about learning environments, especially for those of you who spent a long time making displays. Let's see. So the first of four kind of umbrella points here. By the way, there's my distracting pointer. Hopefully I can skip a slide here. Bear with me. There we go. No, there we go. Okay. Oral noise, otherwise known as just noise. I'm quite a fan of a silent classroom, but depending on the activity, of course. I don't think classrooms are these days really silent enough. But then I realise in practice it's pretty hard to maintain a silent classroom, mainly because most of our pupils are generally pretty keen actually to learn. And for them to maximise learning in your lesson, they'll probably need to discuss the activity with their peers to some extent. We all know though, if you just let people just talk, then some people will quickly get distracted. And who can blame them? Because if the classroom's full of distractions, other people talking or ideas, things on the walls, then there's plenty of opportunities to get distracted. And certainly many of my pupils certainly could be, they're sort of guilty sometimes of looking for distraction, anything to stop them having to think about the thing you've asked them to think about. So consider this thing I call the burst tactic, which is it ticks all the boxes now. You can have a silent classroom as a default, but then every few minutes you allow some discussion about the work that they've been doing and thinking about individually. Just like a way of depressurizing the classroom. So every few minutes, just give us 60 seconds, okay, discuss. And within that 60 seconds of discussion, it's often short enough for pupils to keep it on task, and that you actually listen to what they're saying, and typically they're talking about the work they've just been doing. And then you can call time and back to a silent room again. They can crack on with the worksheet or activity. Obviously this only works for certain types of task, but if they're learning and practicing or drilling a certain, say, mathematical routine, say, then it can work really, really well. Okay, number two, what I call fluff. This is the stuff, there's a few different examples I've got here, but fluff is the stuff that just doesn't need to be there. It's diluting a teaching point or an idea or a skill that you're trying to convey. It's distracting, it's stuff that just doesn't need to be there. Here's some examples. Now this is from the 10 ticks pack of mathematical worksheets. Now there's some really good stuff in 10 ticks. I don't use it very much, and actually this one that you've got here, I've got a number of criticisms of this, but the main one, the one I'm going to talk about here, you've probably already noticed it. That's right. What's the point of those clip art images? Do they add anything? I don't think so. I think contrary to popular opinion, adding things like that doesn't make learning fun. And actually, if you give a sheet like this to a class, you can guarantee that at some point in the lesson, you'll hear them talking about it. That woman at the bottom looked pretty terrifying. That'll catch their attention, and it'll divert their attention away from... Oh, there you go, action. Who's doing that? Let's have a mute. Brilliant. So yeah, my tip there would be to defluff your worksheet. as I've done with these slides, you can see as well. Maybe you think they look boring, but that's okay. I'm fine with that. At least you can see what I want you to see on the screen. Okay, here, you don't need to read that, but what you have here is a perfectly innocent simultaneous equations question trying to get out. Here's what it really looks like underneath. So that's the mathematical version of what you're solving here. Now, there's nothing wrong with this question here, but if you go on to the wordy question too soon in a sequence of learning, then you're going to distract and confuse your pupils. So when you're teaching a new skill, it can be so delicate, it can be forming in the child's mind, but it can be such a delicate idea, and the slightest thing can just destroy that, and they have to just start the whole idea again, start trying to form that idea, concept in their mind from scratch again. So you've got to be very careful each time you layer a new skill on. I would not want to go anywhere near this with my class until I was absolutely certain that everybody was a master of this. Because then what we're doing is we're not just giving them a really hard question to do. We're literally just layering one extra layer on top. Because the first step of this is to turn it into this. And then you just routinely do what you're already an expert in. Now, I've tried to break down simultaneous equations and just work out how many actual mathematical skills are involved in solving a pair of those. And obviously, people would have different ideas on that, but I count somewhere between about 12 and 15 separate mathematical skills, or separately definable mathematical skills that are required to solve a pair of simultaneous equations. So if you want to stick another one yet on top of that, you better be sure that your students are already masters of the other 12 or 15, because it's just going to make it harder, and it's going to potentially destroy that delicate idea that they've built up. So my next suggestion there is to keep teaching focused on specific skills until those skills are absolutely secure. So try and isolate skills before you then bring in other ones. Here we have a horribly ugly looking, but actually perfectly nice maths question. So this is straight out of a GCSE paper, but it was being used in a Year 10 topic test. Now, there's no reason, obviously, the real past papers are a great repository for for questions to use in the test, but you can change those to make them friendlier to people who've only just learned the skill. So this is circle theorems. Let's look at the text. A, B, C, and D are points on a circle, centre 0. Well, look, there's a circle and there's the centre. Do we really need that piece of information? No, get rid of it. AOBE and DCE are straight lines. Well, yeah, I can see that as well. That's pretty obvious. CO equals CE. Well, that's indicated by these little tick marks here, so we don't need that. Angle AOD is 69. That's on the diagram. Angle CEO is X degrees. That's on the diagram. So we can just get rid of all of that. And I'd also say up here, we've got diagram not accurately drawn. Well, you know, it's never accurately drawn. And frankly, if somebody starts getting their protractor out to do a question like this, then they've completely missed the point anyway. So get rid of diagram not accurately drawn. So we can tidy this up. And look, you've got a much more attractive question straight away. But we can go further. Look, we don't need the letters on the diagram anymore. So scrub those. I'm going to keep the O because it's nice to have the center of the circle defined. And, you know, some people might even argue that we could get rid of calculate the value of X, because what else are you going to do with this question, with this diagram? So we could get rid of that. Now, there's one more distraction in that diagram, which I would probably change if I was giving this to a Year 10 class, and that's the particular choice of angle. Maybe don't use 69. Remove redundant information from questions. Okay, technically it needs to be there, which is why it's there in the GCSE exam. But if you're making a topic test for people who've just learned simpler circle theorems questions, say, just keep it simple, remove the fluff. And then lastly, on the topic of fluff, what we have here is, this was a brilliant lesson with one of my colleagues that I observed. And it's a bit of a fuzzy photo because I took it from the back of the class on my iPad. But this was right at the end of an absolutely brilliant lesson. But I just have this one criticism at the end. The teacher was over here on the right, was basically doing the plenary, a really good idea. It's a year 7 lesson, and the class had learned so much this lesson that they're actually working towards negative indices, and this is the first lesson of indices. And look, we're doing this great work over here on the right, but all the stuff from the rest of the lesson is still on the board. So what a great opportunity that would have been there to just quickly clean the board. It takes 10 seconds, clean the board, and then have your big important plenary with the status that it deserves in the middle of the board at the end of the lesson. So drive home, key teaching point by first clearing the board. Simple. Okay, here's the controversial bit, visual environmental noise, which is a po-faced way of saying displays. Here is one of my favourite classrooms to teach in. Here's another one. Here's another one, Spartan. Look, all you can see is the board. Now there are posters up in this room, but they're at the back. And it looks pretty. You can see them and you can draw the attention of your students to those posters whenever you want. But when you're teaching something else, they can't see those. All they can see is what you're doing at the front. There's another one. Now here's another classroom in the same school. It's a beautiful classroom. The teachers made a lot of effort to make it pretty and have done well there. But do we need all this stuff here every lesson? And could we maybe stick that stuff at the back where it's not distracting? There's a map here of the countries where French is spoken, and that's obviously really important in the sort of complete picture of learning French. But is it important every lesson? Probably not. Probably only about 1 in, I don't know, I guess 1 in 10, 1 in 20 lessons does that become important. So why is it there right next to this person who sits here? They just have to look left and there it is. And you could be doing something really important over here and they might be distracted by it. Cover it up or replace it, move it, is my tip. You can still have a classroom looking pretty, but you can help, pupils have attention deficit disorders. They find this stuff really difficult to not stop looking at. So that's my tip there. Consider covering up or relocating posters that are not constantly relevant. And then very lastly, I'm afraid to say this, guys, you as teacher are often a big distraction in the room. We're very enthusiastic. We love our subjects, we love teaching. So we stand at the front and wave our arms around like this and point to things and speak fast and excitedly about things and pronounce words in certain ways, and all of this can be quite distracting. So is there some way that you can potentially get out of the front of the classroom? Can you take yourself out of the way? Now I'm lucky enough to have an iPad with a stylus, and I can connect that up to the projector. So I can actually stand anywhere or even sit amongst the pupils and write on my iPad, and it comes up on the projector at the front. And that means actually I can go through examples, but with a silent classroom. I'm not saying anything, I'm just writing the maths out in silence. And then I can press undo and get rid of it all and then slowly replace it. And that's when I can start asking questions to the class. What did I do next? What, why did I bring that over there? Etc. It's a really effective way of doing it. You can even go one step further and, building on what I said a second ago about visual environmental noise, turn the lights off. Draw the curtains at the beginning of the lesson. So turn the lights off at this key point. And it's like the cinema effect, I call it. It's when the lights go off in the cinema, everyone just is quiet. They've learned to be quiet when that happens, and you can sort of just leverage that to get that maximum concentration in your room as you go through a key example. Yeah, my last point here, I just displayed something I wasn't meant to at the time. But when I was in year 8, I remember I had a teacher called Mrs. Bennett, and she was quite a sort of severe woman with a quite terrifying stare. And I was terrified of her, really. She had a proper stare. And she did that thing that we're all taught to do when you're addressing a large group of people or any group of people. You look at the individuals in the eye, you address them individually. It's a good way of keeping people's attention. But are those people listening? Because when Mrs. Bennet looked at me, I just sort of stared back like a rabbit in the headlights, nodding. And I wasn't listening to a thing she was saying because I was just terrified. So just be aware of that, because I spotted it a few years ago. I was just talking away to a class and I saw a girl look back at me just nodding, and I thought, ah, you're not listening to me. And that was when I realized it was time to stop talking. Thank you.
Mickey, thank you so much for that. We've got a couple of questions. Is from Ruanti Vijay Singh here. Is defluffing contextual? Would it depend on subject, age, group, culture, etc.?
Good question. I think a lot of things can be defluffed. If you're talking about maybe worksheets, I realise that some of the things I've said make me look to be a sort of complete, like 100% rational, and only ever include things that are relevant. And obviously, you've got to take a call on certain things. A lot of learning materials have got colourful things in that probably don't need to be there. You want things to look nice, that's perfectly okay, but there's a point at which it might, you might want to stop. I don't know. I think I need a little bit more help to answer that question. Ask it again.
Let me find it. Is defluffing contextual? Would it depend on subject, age, group, culture, etc.? Ruanti also responds saying, maybe it's English language, for example.
Yeah, obviously that's the thing. As a mathematician, it's certainly easier in some cases to defluff things, because maths is, that's what it's about, isn't it? It's sort of extracting that isolated idea out of things quite often anyway. So it's certainly easier to do that. You need some context to be able to teach an idea in a lot of subjects. In English, say, if you want to talk about sentence structure, you need a sentence that makes sense. It has to be about something. But there may be other elements of the learning material that you could defluff. And certainly board use. I've always got 9 times out of 10 when I observe colleagues, I have a comment to make about their use of the board. And quite often they're trying to make a key teaching point and they're writing on a tiny little corner of the board, and there's all this fluff from the rest of the lesson, which is perfectly valid, but it might not be valid to that key point that you're making just there. And if you're not going to need it again later in the lesson, get rid of it, clean it off the board, and just help people to focus. That's what it is. But the general idea of fluff is just always can you help people to be focused on the thing you want them to be focused on? That's the essence of defluffing. And
cool.
That's the idea. Yeah.
So Fazmina is asking, she's wondering if a classroom should be so minimalistic. She's also wondering, will the students not respond positively to a visually appealing classroom?
I'm not against a visually appealing classroom. As I said, move things to the back of the room, and you can still have a pretty classroom, and you can still stick posters up as you require them at the front that are pretty, and as people come in and out of the room, they'll be looking around the room and seeing what's on the sides of the classroom and the back and what's in the corridor. They'll love it. But when you're teaching fractions, do you need 100 square on the wall at the front of the room? It's not. If it's not going to be used, if it's not relevant, no, you don't need it. So to get rid of it. Here's an interesting idea as well. Actually, one of my colleagues has, in one of those Spartan classrooms I showed you, that's got 2 posters at the back of the room about economic principles, and so those have been up all year. This was sort of March time, and he said that one of those topics had come up for discussion as part of the curriculum, as part of the syllabus. And he raised it expecting some of the pupils to know something about it, because there's a poster about it with all the basic ideas about it at the back of the room. And not a single person had seen it on the way in, and now some of those pupils had that was even their form room, and they hadn't even bothered to look at it. So yeah, posters they can look pretty, but in terms of their educational content, if you're not drawing people's attention to them ever, then quite often people are not really reading them. They just don't see how they fit in. They don't see the relevance of them. They don't see how they fit into to their interests. Yeah, put posters up, but put them at the back of the room. That's my tip.
Super. Thank you so much, Mickey. You also mentioned using your stylus and your iPad at the back of the classroom, but I think most teachers back home will not have that opportunity. However, they could still, without using the technology, the information could still be on the board, but they could still go behind the students and they could still talk at the students. So the distraction of yourself isn't there, and the students' visual, the eyesight is just on the board, what's at the front, and not what's not focusing on the teacher.